Welcome to Being in Practice.
I'm Erin Davis. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a therapist.
I'm Dani Dwyer-Willingham. I use they, she pronouns, and I'm a quantum somatic coach. And we're a couple of queer, neurodivergent, multi-passionates here to get curious and unpack elements of collective and individual experiences through our intuitive, trauma-informed lenses.
We're both practitioners and people in our own constant discovery, here to provide education, entertainment, and an exploration on the practice of being, as messy and as multidimensional as it can be.
Let's be in practice together. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Being in Practice podcast. I'm Dani.
I'm Erin.
And today we have a very special guest, Felicia Keller Boyle, who Erin will introduce just in a moment. First, I just want to say last week we talked about body image and embodiment, what it feels like to be in a constantly changing body. And today we are going to talk about something I think we all deal with: stress, burnout, overwhelm. These are such components of, I think, current societal living and the way that we exist in our jobs, in capitalism. So many of us are struggling, especially on the other side of this pandemic that we all went through. And we've got an expert to talk about that with us today. And I'm really excited for this conversation. So Erin, would you like to introduce our guest?
Yes. So Felicia, she, her pronouns, is a therapist in private practice and business coach for therapists. She began working in mental health and social work in agency settings while she was still in college. Though she loved her work with clients, she became disillusioned with the double standard of advocating for clients' well-being while working in systems that were hostile to her own. While in grad school, she realized that she could pursue private practice and decided to go for it even though it felt risky. As a first-generation college graduate who lived her childhood below the poverty line, it wasn't easy at first to charge private practice rates that would sustain her. But she dug into her own money wounds and began to truly advocate for herself. Now she's passionate about helping other helpers do the same. My personal note on Felicia is actually that she has been my business coach as a therapist, and she's a coach for therapists. So we've had about a year-long relationship, and I've followed you for longer than that on Instagram, Felicia, and I know that I wanted you on this podcast on this topic specifically because I feel like we've resonated a lot and have similar values and beliefs around, particularly obviously as a therapist and you being my coach, how we can do therapy better, be in helping professionals without the old belief system and to be stressed is to be a good therapist, to be burnt out as a good therapist, to grind for your clients regardless of how you feel, right? And those are a lot of messages that are in social work, especially, I think, in the helping professions in general. And that's something I really was attracted to you as a coach about. And so I'm really excited to have you here to talk about all those kinds of dispelling things that you are constantly talking about on your Instagram and in your coaching, I know too. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Erin, especially for inviting me here. It feels really sweet as your business coach, as somebody who's worked with you as your business coach, to get to be a guest on your podcast, which is something we talked about in our coaching together. So it feels so full circle to be here. And yeah, you're right. When it comes to helping therapists, I think there are a lot of business coaches out there that talk about how to make money or how to do marketing. And I do think a lot of them talk about the well-being of the therapist, but in my work, I try to push the envelope even further in that direction to really start talking about how can we make this a job that is better than you could possibly imagine. What would a job look like that you feel like you're even getting away with something, like I can't believe it could ever be this good, and yet it's my life. I think that is a threshold that a lot of therapists aren't willing to cross, even in their own imaginations. And that's something that I really appreciate about having gotten to work with you, is you took it there in your practice. And I think you're proof that when therapists do that, not only do they get to enjoy their lives more, but they show up and do better work for their clients. Like I haven't heard you really ever express like an ounce of resentment towards clients. And I think, unfortunately, that's not that typical, right? A lot of therapists, because of good therapist conditioning, which is this term I've coined, we do tend to make decisions that are for quote unquote our clients, but that ultimately results in us being resentful towards them, and that's not a good position to put ourselves or our clients in.
Yeah, no, I feel like that experience can be generalized too, because outside of therapy, I think that what was the term that you coined? Good therapist conditioning. I think a lot of us have good people conditioning or good worker conditioning. And I think
Absolutely.
so much stress and overwhelm and burnout can stem from people pleasing, from overworking ourselves for the benefit of others without taking care of ourselves first. So I think this is such a, like we said at the top, such a collective experience that I think especially people in helping professions deal with, but also I know almost nobody at this point who has a job and feels like it's sustainable for them without making serious life adjustments or serious adjustments to the way that they treat themselves and take care of themselves first. So,
Yeah.
do you work with anyone who's not a therapist or not therapists, or do you only work with therapists?
Yeah, so in my private practice, my specialty is substance addiction and
Mm,
codependency. So I was just going to say that part of my own story and part of the reason why I'm so passionate about this within the realm of therapy is because it's deeply personal for me, beyond the therapy context. Um, I identify as being codependent. I didn't used to use that term to describe myself. I didn't used to know what that meant. I remember hearing a professor talk about it in grad school. I think maybe it was in a couples therapy course. And she was describing, well, attempting to describe a codependent dynamic between a couple. And it seemed really vague to me. And I kept on asking, like, well, what is that? And she kept on calling it a dance. And I walked away feeling still very confused. I was like, I don't, she's like, well, it's a sort of dance. And I'm like, okay, but like, what kind? Can you like flesh out this dance? And then as time went on, I got into a recovery community where a huge focus of that was codependency. And I started to learn what that dance that she was referring to meant, and did and continue to do a lot of healing around that. So, I'm a person who grew up really paying a lot of attention to other people and feeling a lot of responsibility for how other people around me were feeling and thinking and behaving and the circumstances of their lives. And I actually wasn't spending nearly as much time paying attention to myself. And so I actually like to describe codependency as sort of like a very inefficient system in terms of energy.
mm,
Because it's like, Dani, if I am just so concerned with what's going on with you and I'm kind of twisting myself into pretzel shapes to make sure that like you're happy and you have what you need, and then you're also doing the same with me, and neither of us are really like paying attention to our own needs and expressing them, I'm just like making shit up about you, assuming that I know what you need, and
mm.
then like doing things for you, quote unquote, and then resenting you. You're doing the same thing. We are wasting massive amounts of energy that could be
Absolutely.
so much more efficiently spent by tuning into ourselves, getting real, which can be hard, right? Especially if you're a person who's experienced trauma. That can be a real trauma response, and paying attention to somebody else rather than myself because it's hard to go inside, right?
Yeah.
But if we can do that, go inside, pay attention to ourselves, I can start to find out, what do I really want and need here? And then maybe I can tell you that, and I can take a risk, and you can do the same. So um, I began to really unpack that in my own personal life, in my romantic relationships, in my familial relationships, and then also in my practice as a therapist. Are there ways that I'm being codependent in my practice? Are there
Mm,
ways that I am making assumptions about what my clients need and want, about what other therapists expect from me? Are there ways that I'm not actually taking care of myself? So, really, this is something that I have addressed all throughout my life. And when I've talked to my friends about codependency and they say, well, what is codependency? And I give them an example from my life, almost always people are like, oh my God, I think I'm codependent too. So,
mm.
to your point, I think, yes, this is kind of everywhere, this tendency to, which really contributes to burnout.
That's what I was just gonna link it to.
Yes.
Like, so you're equating code like codependency is maybe one aspect or maybe one major aspect of burnout, and this is all relatable to all of us.
It's like codependent conditioning conditions us to constantly overextend, which I think also we've talked about this before, especially femme-bodied people. By the time we're in our 30s, so many of us have chronic illness, so many of us have mental health conditions, so many of us are getting diagnosed with things like ADHD and autism for the first time because that conditioning has caught up with us, our trauma has caught up with us. And we are now in this place where we have spent so long focusing outside of ourselves, even if we're in therapy, even if I think if we're on a quote unquote path of self-discovery and healing, that stuff is so in our bodies by the time we reach, I guess, what would be considered middle age, that overwhelm and burnout and chronic stress are so wired in that it can be so much harder to overcome at that point. So I think, bringing this into people's awareness, I think the earlier we can start addressing these things, the more efficient we can support ourselves in overcoming them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious so we have like this beautiful foundation you just laid for us that feels very relatable to me. I'm hoping our audience as well. So where do you go from there though? Like, right? Like you realize you're codependent, and maybe, I don't know, maybe this is the next best question, but if people are listening and they're realizing, oh shit, like that sounds familiar.
Can I interrupt really quickly?
Yes.
Would you mind, just for everyone listening, giving an example of codependency, just in case people are kind of questioning, like, what could that look like for me, or how do I start identifying?
And do you mean like codependency maybe even outside of relating to another person?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Well, I would say that codependency typically shows up in relationship. Yeah, it's typically having to do with another person, even if it's only in your fantasy, right? But it's almost always related to another entity outside of yourself. It's the internal sense is, I can't do what I want because of some consequence, whether that's like this person's reaction or more of like a systemic consequence. Like, I can't do what I want. I would do this thing, but I can't because of da 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 da. That's a phrase you'll hear people say a lot. It's a phrase I used to say a lot, In terms of an example, the first thing that came to my mind, and this was something that happened after I had already gotten into recovery and was starting to notice this in myself and unpack it. I remember I was in my hometown. I was driving with my mom, and we were passing this place where like an acquaintance, like they own this shop, and I wanted to stop and say hi. So we're driving, my mom's driving, I'm in the passenger seat, and I'm like, hey, can we stop and say hi to Audrey? And she's like, Felicia, I just really wanted to get going to the place we were going. I don't want to go there. I mean, I'd love to see Audrey, but we're already on our way here. Can we just go? And I was like, I'd really like to go. And she was like, okay, fine, we'll go. But because if we don't go, then you're going to be mad at me. And then I was like, oh, wait, never mind. I don't know if this is going to involve you doing something that you really, really don't want to do. Then I don't want that. Like, I don't want to be in that dynamic. And she said it, she expressed it verbally. Like, I don't want to do this thing, but I don't want you to be mad at me. Therefore, I'm going to do what you want me to do. Another example is I was in this couples counseling training with a somatic therapist named Bill Bowen. He's since passed, but he was like a father in somatics for a really long time. And he talked about how compromising is really bad for partnerships, which seems odd because like conventional wisdom is you got to compromise. You get what you want some of the time. I get what I want some of the time. And he said compromising is not good for relationships because what happens is one person is winning and one person is losing. And when that is happening, the relationship itself is losing. It wears down at the well-being of the relationship. So he said, instead, have a conversation about what you both want and actually come up with a win-win solution, And this, when I was working with couples more in my private practice, this is something I brought into that work because And you can see how the compromise is, in essence, another codependent dynamic in a way, right? It's like, I really don't want to do this thing, but I feel like I don't have a choice because it's your turn to get your way because we're doing the whole compromising thing. So it sets this up and it can start to degrade, your enjoyment of the relationship over time.
I want to kind of go back to something you said, which was when your mom in the example that you used, she was afraid to make you mad. And I think that at a base, the question or that you said, like, I would do it if I could, but I can't. I think that is both of those components are so key, not only to enmeshment and codependency for me, but in the patterns that can contribute to chronic stress and chronic overwhelm, which turn into burnout. Because I think as someone like I came out of a nuclear family, and it was something that I told myself for a long time, like I could never do that. And I think I see a lot of people in partnerships, in relationships, in jobs around me saying things like that. I would, but I can't because I've got a family. I would, but I can't because I've got these responsibilities. I would, but I can't because. And I think all that's doing is spinning the hamster wheel of us not being true to ourselves and us not being able to be honest. And like you said, kind of compromising constantly when that, regardless of what the relationship is, whether it's to a job or to another human or to a whole family, that's only contributing to the self-sacrifice that drains our energy completely.
Yeah, you're right. It does really chip away. And what you said earlier, and the phrase that we've been repeating around, I would do this, but I can't. Something that I've learned through my own healing around codependency is to take radical responsibility for my own experience. And when we break down a statement like that, it's actually just not true. It's a lie. You can do it. You're just not willing to feel the experience of being you that does that, right? The person who disappoints others in their lives, the person who breaks the mold in their family and doesn't do what's expected, the person, if you're a therapist, who disappoints a client. A huge part of codependency for me was controlling how other people perceived me. I really wanted people to perceive me in a certain way. I wanted to be approved of. I wanted to be liked. I wanted, and I've isolated this over the years. I actually didn't care so much if people didn't like me as long as they didn't like me for the right reasons, meaning like they had the correct quote unquote perception of me and they just disagreed with that. They're like, Felicia's just shit. Like, yeah, this is who she is. And I'm like, yep, that's who I am. And they're like, but I hate that. I'm like, cool, that's fine. You can hate me.
Yeah.
But if they like didn't understand me and they didn't like me, I was like, no, but you didn't understand me. Let me fix that. Let me explain. Oh, you're upset. Okay, let me control this. And so when people say, I would do this, but I can't, bullshit, that's not true. I mean, there are actual barriers in this life. Like, I'm not trying to take that away. Like, there are real barriers. There are roadblocks. There are things that are incredibly hard for us to do. And there are some things that, given societal conditions, we literally cannot do. Like, I'm not saying that's not true. But there is a hell of a lot of shit that we quote unquote can't do. But it's really coming down to, I don't want to feel the experience of being the person who does that. And that was huge for me in my life. That was huge for me and my family.
Yeah.
I have been playing this particular role for a really long time. I have been being a quote unquote good therapist for a really long time. I decided I want to be a therapist when I was 13. I started working in the field as soon as they would fucking let me. I was in it. I was like, give me the hardest jobs. Give me the most challenging clients. Give me a caseload of 70 people. I got it. Put me in, coach. And after a while, I was like, what the hell? Like, why am I trying to prove myself, you know? And at a certain point that was what I wanted. I did want to work with people. And then as that began to wear on me and it just wasn't making sense for my life anymore, I really had to adjust my identity. I had to be willing to have other people see how I was living my life and say, you know what, Felicia's a selfish bitch. And I had to be like, you're allowed to think that. I'm not going to run around the world trying to control what everybody thinks of me. That's how I spent my whole childhood. It sucked. I'm over it. And so that's part of why I've leaned into this identity of the bad therapist. And by that, I don't mean like bad as in like poor quality of care or being unethical. I mean bad as in like I'm no longer playing in the role of being the good therapist who's concerned with keeping the whole field happy. I'm also not concerned with being the good daughter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Done.
Yep.
But the interesting thing, and I think also Erin has really expressed this in their practice, is like when you are willing to let go of the what you feel like are the forces from the outside trying to control how you show up in your life, you actually do become more generous. You do higher quality of work. You become better in the roles that you occupy. And so I think for a lot of people, they're terrified to start taking care of themselves because they actually think I will turn into a selfish monster. I actually will become a bad, immoral person. And I just haven't found that to be the case in my life or in the lives of the people that I've worked with. I think actually you begin to tap into more generosity, a more open heart, and oftentimes you have an even bigger impact on the lives of people that you love, all the people you were trying to help in the first place. When you get out of the way of trying to control all of them, then you can actually become helpful. It's incredible how it works. So we're chasing the wrong tactic here. There's a better tactic that works so much better for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like everything you've said, like obviously resonate with, that we've talked a lot, I feel like has come through in our coaching sessions over the last year. And I know in my experience, just to share a little bit, that I'm working less, making more. And what's come of that is this podcast. Like, I wouldn't be able to be doing this if I wasn't in the position I am, where I only hold sessions 3 days a week and I have 4 days a week to spend how I want. And this is one of the things I want to spend it on. This is not making us money at this point in time anyway. I said at this point,
Sponsors
not yet.
Sponsor these people. But you're
But
right.
really, this is, me and Dani want to help people. We think we have wisdom to share. We know we have guests that have wisdom to share. And yeah, I think this is right on the head.
I think this metaphor that's coming up for me, or it's more like imagery, is like all of these identities that we put on ourselves are like we're carrying all of these bricks, or kind of like we've been bricked over our whole lives, these identities that we take on, these things that we take on of like, I would do this, but I can't. The shoulds, the sacrifices, the compromises. And every time we're willing to unburden ourselves of one of these bricks, we become more capable of moving forward. We become more capable of supporting those actually around us. When we are unburdened enough to feel free, that opens up possibility for us as individuals to then actually support our communities, our clients, our jobs, whatever we're doing, however we want to show up in the world. Like creating personal freedom somatically, energetically, habitually, and otherwise enables us to actually show up in the ways that we want to for the people that we care the most about. For me, that's like my kid, my family, my community, my clients,
and I
the
think
collective.
Number one is ourselves. And that's what we're talking about now.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, the unburdening, the de-bricking, as in your metaphor, whatever your imagery, is the self-care piece. But as we're talking about codependency, we have to start caring about ourselves and getting uncomfortable with that level of self-focus and self-love. And I think you've used the word selfish a few times, right? Like this bad thing of people are afraid they're going to turn into selfish people. And I know I've had to work with so many clients on the word selfish, because I actually don't believe selfish is a bad word or a bad thing or morally corrupt. I think selfish is neutral, and that we can be selfish either in ways that cause harm or maybe hurt or are unhealthy, but we can also be selfish in ways that are positive and life-giving and self-loving. And I do think that debricking is a form of selfish, like the quote unquote positive form of selfishness. And that first person we have to love is us. And that can be so uncomfortable, because I've worked with so many clients that view that level of self-love that we're talking about today as negative selfish. And it's so interesting, because we have to get over this hump of selfish is morally wrong, and even doing this act, which I see as their therapist as self-love and something they truly want for themselves, that is good for their life, that is their path from what I can see. But it's selfish, it's bad, and I can't do that for right. It's these limiting beliefs that we're talking about, and probably from codependency and the bricks and whatever else. But it's so fascinating that you brought up selfish, and now it's here like that. But I see that all the time.
Yeah. And Felicia, I'd be curious of your perspective on this, but I think for me, again, that image of being weighed down, like that is what burnout feels like, when we feel like we've ground to a halt and we can't continue. And I think this might be a great time to talk about when you see people, and when you see people who come into your coaching practice or into your private practice who are like, I feel so stuck. I feel so overwhelmed. I feel like that's such a visceral experience that many of us can relate to. This just feeling like we can't put one foot in front of the other because we've gotten to this place where everything is just too much.
Absolutely.
Where do you start with somebody like that?
Well, there's so many different ways I could answer this, because obviously I've worked with a lot of people who come in like this. But, as we've been talking, I've been using my own experience as like the example here. And so I'll just continue to do that in this. I would say like the first thing is just to know that like, yeah, this is actually happening. This is real. I think if you are a person who, especially if you're a person who quote unquote has it together, it can be a little bit more obvious that someone's having a hard time if it's more obvious that they're having a hard time. But if you're the person in a sea of people who are obviously having a hard time, you can really get missed. If you're the person who, maybe you're the therapist, maybe you're the spouse or the sibling or the friend, and you are trying to sort of maintain, because if you don't maintain, like there's not room for one other person in the system to not be maintaining, right? This is already so stressed. You've got to hold it together, right? So when people like that start work, I think the first thing is just like, your suffering is real. Like you may not be manifesting or being expressed in all of these more obvious ways, but like this shit is real. So I'd say that's like that first thing, is like that compassion and the acknowledgement of like, this counts. And then I think the other thing would be, again, to go inside. And for a lot of people, that's really hard, especially if you've experienced a lot of trauma, or if your relationship with your body is in any way complicated, like you've talked about chronic illness, that can make it hard for us to connect with our bodies. So I think, finding a practitioner who is skilled at that can be really helpful. There have been ways that, mindfulness has become super popularized, somatics has become really popularized, but it's incredibly important to wield those tools gently, especially when working with folks with a lot of somatic trauma. This is something I learned early on working in a methadone clinic with a lot of highly traumatized individuals, that I was getting really into like meditation and mindfulness, but I worked with some people where like we couldn't go inside their bodies. It wasn't okay to close their eyes. And so we found other ways to help them slow down and pay attention, right? So I think, for folks who are really traumatized in their body and they encounter a practitioner who's just kind of pushing, just go inside, and that is super activating, like that, you're not wrong that that's not working for you at that stage. There are probably some other approaches that would be more valuable for you in that moment. But when possible, to begin to slow down and start to pay really, really close attention to what's going on, because that's going to give a lot of information. And then from there, I would say like making some behavior changes. So for instance, I remember working with a client at one point where and this seems like a very kind of superficial example, but like it's still the same dynamic. So when they would get invited to do things, they would knee jerk answer, say yes. And this led to them being very overwhelmed, overextended, and they really didn't even, there was no pause. There was no thinking to say no. It was just like literally, if someone asked them to do something, they would vomit out a yes with no consideration for their life. And so I said, all right, you're over here on this extreme. If saying no all the time is one end of the spectrum and saying yes all the time is the other end of the spectrum, you're over here. Sometimes when people are at one extreme or the other, I give them medicine to do the opposite for a while. So if you're really codependent, you're always paying attention to other people, you're going to practice being selfish. And to your point, Erin, that's not actually a bad thing, but it's going to feel really fucking scary and it's going to feel really bad. And you're going to feel like a total monster.
Yeah.
You're going to think you're an absolute monster, but do it anyway because that's your medicine. Don't worry, you're not going to turn into a monster. You'll probably end up in the middle. So with this person who kept on saying yes, I said, okay, for the next week, just say, let me think about it, or no. The word yes, you've forgotten how to say that word, doesn't exist for you anymore. You're going to say no, or you're going to say, give me some more time to think about it. So again, that's like being validated, slowing down, and then starting to experiment with some behavior changes. And if you're working with a therapist in an ongoing way, that can be really helpful to kind of like track this, see what's working, make adjustments, continue to help build that internal self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
I like the medicine thing. I know
Yeah.
we've talked about that in our coaching stuff.
Yeah, I think it's also really important for people listening. Sometimes when we talk about the pendulum swinging, right? So when we're experimenting with new ways of being, we're going to go from one end to the other. And there's going to be a lot of swinging back and forth as we really retrain ourselves to do these things. And I can only imagine, because I've experienced this for myself, when people go to the opposite side, when you're saying like, have your no week, they might feel like the bad guy. And also the people around them might be very disrupted by that change in behavior, because when we're in codependent dynamics or when we're in more enmeshed patterns, the people around us get very used to us saying yes and bending over backwards and self-sacrificing for their benefit before our own. So I think it's important. I mean, I'm sure, we support our clients in this, as I know you do, of what that fallout can feel like. And that can be re-traumatizing. And I think, people kind of like you talked about with the folks you were working with, you had to go slowly working with closing their eyes and learning meditation. I think also people need to understand that these are things that can take time too, because repatterning relationship dynamics in our lives isn't something that happens overnight, typically.
No, it doesn't. And going back to like this idea of radical responsibility and sort of like choosing yourself first, not everyone's going to go with you. Relationships that have been so steeped in this codependency that you're waking up to and you're saying, oh, wow, this really isn't working for me anymore. Not everyone's going to go with you. Some people are going to say, they are going to tell you your worst fears, the things that you are most scared of happening, that people will leave, that people will tell you you're a bad person, that people will say you don't care. In some cases, that's going to happen. And what other people think of you is none of your business. Classic.
I feel like I also just, where my brain is going, listening to both of you right in this little moment, is how this relates to work and jobs and being an employee and having an employer and having a boss and job expectations. Therapist or not, helping profession or not, like, we are exploited. Companies are exploitive. Mostly, I mean, I'm blanketing here a bit, but right, mostly companies are exploitive.
Corporations.
The places we work for often are exploitive. And I think, this is radical in the realm of relationships, family dynamics, partnership, whatever. But this is also radical, like, with your job. Like, where can you say no more? Like, how have you been taken advantage of and are overextending for the sake of your boss? And maybe you're like really good friends with your boss and like it's really hard to say no, or you really do care about the company and you want to help the customers, help the clients, like produce. but you're being taken advantage of. You're noticing these signs of burnout. You have a people pleaser personality, codependent dynamics are happening. I mean, you said not everyone can go with you, right? And that's in the relationship realm, but also like maybe your job can't come with you. And that feels like even bigger, because then how are you going to make money? And like all these very real feeling, scary feeling things like could be of consequence. I know this is something that I started to experience in agency work at the end, where I was seeing a different way to live, and I was getting tired of feeling like I don't think I wouldn't go as far as say getting taken advantage of, but I did realize like the company didn't care about me, even if I loved the company and it did great work. And I have nothing bad to say about that agency, but it was an agency. I wasn't getting paid what I wanted to get paid, and I was doing a lot, and I was tired of it. So I remember like calling out sick one day, and my boss like took a vacation time instead of sick time, and it was all this thing. But yeah, it was just I got tired of it, and eventually left and all of that. But not everyone has that ability right away.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think about this perspective, and that's what people can do in relationships. I'm wondering if that works in right, saying no, doing the opposite, taking your medicine. How does that look at work?
Yeah, great question. I relate to your story. I have my own version of that story. The last agency that I was employed at full time, I kept on trying to like get a job as a case manager, which is a job I had had before for multiple years at a different agency. And they were like, "You're not qualified." And I was like, "This is bullshit. I am overqualified for this job. I would be so good at it." And then I helped unionize that place and I went to grad school and I was like, "Peace." Like, I'm out of here. So like, I tried to stay there. I tried to advocate for myself. I tried to get the job I knew I would really excel in. And when it became clear that there was just no option for me to do that there, I was like, "Oh yeah, you guys really don't care." And to be clear, I didn't start the unionization effort because I couldn't get the job I wanted. Like there were some major issues with how frontline workers were being treated by management. And this is systemic. Like even the best agencies have major issues when it comes to that. So I think this is one of the reasons why right now we are seeing so many new entrepreneurs. We're seeing so many therapists starting their own businesses who probably 10 years ago wouldn't have. Because I think there is this critical mass of people who are showing that it's possible. And so it's becoming less scary. We're thinking, as a massage therapist, as a therapist, as a healthcare practitioner, maybe I could start my own business. So I think for some of us, that is an option. Of course, being an entrepreneur means you're taking on tons of risk, and not everybody has as much leeway, right? If you're a single parent with kids, if if you, depending on your life circumstances, your financial circumstances, it can be a lot trickier. But being a therapist in San Francisco, I have worked with a lot of professionals in a lot of different settings. And definitely we've worked on like, how do you advocate for yourself at work? How do you make boundaries? And so I think the thing to do is ask for what you want. That could have consequences. Like, I'm not here to tell you, like, oh, just ask for what you want. And as long as like you've meditated before, then like everything will be fine. No, shit could go really, really bad. But the alternative, I mean, I don't know. I guess you have to decide what it's worth to you.
Yeah.
Is the alternative bad? Either way, you're making a choice. So it's like, what kind of choice do you want to make? Do you want to take on this risk? Do you want to ask for what you want? Do you want to say no? Do you want to say, like, actually, this isn't in my job description, but I'd be happy to take this on if we changed my title and my compensation? Or no, actually, this is not where I shine. I love working here, and I feel like this role really doesn't suit me right now. I think I'd be really good at this. Like, there are ways to approach this. It's not always like, I would love to do this, but there's no way the system can possibly change, so I have to go. There may be some systems that are like that, but I don't know. You can always see if you want to try to change it before you split.
I think this is where support comes in so much, because folks in my own life are struggling with this kind of job that they feel like they are being so taken advantage of, so exploited as employees, and they've got to build a runway for themselves, and there are people living paycheck to paycheck that things can take so much longer because of systemic oppression, because of marginalization, because of the way that wealth is just unevenly distributed in our society. But also, I feel like there is always a path forward. How long it takes is completely dependent on individual circumstances. And if you're like, I am constantly hitting the end of my rope here, that's where I think people, like all of us, come in, because we can help folks build a very both visionary and realistic version of a plan for themselves to help them instantly and like in this moment address the overwhelm and the stress that they're feeling, while also building towards a future that is more sustainable for themselves. And that is something I feel like everyone deserves. We all, I mean, in the systems we live in, I think are changing, but we've also got to change them in our own lives as well. Not to put the problems on the people to solve, but also it's this radical responsibility.
I was just gonna say. Well, and I like too, to bounce off that, what Felicia said about like, what choice do you want to make? Because whether you don't change anything, don't say anything, or do, it's a choice, right? And that's the radical responsibility too. Just piggybacking off of that, like, is it our fault? No. Are we making a choice? Always.
Yes.
That's it. It's not our fault. Like, this is the amount of like causes and conditions that come together for this reality to be what it is are infinite. Are you responsible for that? How? Like, how would you be responsible for that? It doesn't even make sense.
Are you God?
Yeah, are you God? Oh, nice to meet you. But like, where do you have influence? And where you have influence could be like teeny tiny. It could be like just right now in the seat that I'm sitting in my body, I have influence. And that might be it.
Yeah.
That might be the starting point. Right? And then from there spreading out, where else do I have influence? And I mean, to swing it kind of in a different direction, but Erin, like you were saying, because of the way you set up your practice now, you have the ability to do this, right? Like, the impact can get so much bigger. But first we have to look for, where do I have influence? So it's like, Erin, can you fix the entire mental health system on your own? No. But can you create a work life in which you work 3 days a week seeing clients, and then you create something that is free to anyone who has the ability to listen to podcasts that can be helpful for people who are struggling with mental health? Yes, right? So that's where we have influence. Like, and when those actions come together, when multiple people are living their lives that way, it's almost like, I imagine a bunch of stones being dropped into a pond, or like how waves synchronize so that the peak of the wave gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like, if we're all still just operating in this system where we expect to be exploited, where we keep on acting as if, that system stays the same. And I'm not at all like blaming individual people for the fact that this exists, but I'm talking about, like, if this is the reality, whether we like it or not, how do we actually affect change? Like, this is where we're at. I'm a big proponent of working with reality so that we can change what's possible. But we have to start with this reality. We have to start with our feet on the ground. And once we're there, how do we make change?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I think what's coming up for me is also this desire to address that I've seen a lot of people, especially online, especially in wellness spaces, being like, I'm taking a burnout sabbatical. I love that idea. I think our nervous systems absolutely deserve to rest. I think, as you were saying, like, sometimes the only influence you have is over yourself and the seat that you're sitting in and how you breathe. And sometimes not even that, right? Maybe just literally orienting in the space that we're in is all we have control over. I think some listeners might say, that sounds great, but how? Because I don't have the 3 to 6 month savings to just stop when it doesn't feel good anymore, or to rest when I need to, or I am a single parent with 3 kids, or, the how, I think, is where a lot of us can get caught up in the actionable steps of addressing individual stress and burnout and overwhelm. And I'm just curious, what y'all's perspectives are on how someone who might say that sounds great, and also like, where do we start there?
Yeah. I'm not going to try to yeah. Some people have it worse.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have less options. They have more challenges. And it is not easy. Like, there's no fucking way around that. Like, I'm not good. I have no answer for like how to make that better. But when I think about the times in my life where I may have been closer to that, or the people in my life that I know who are in that position, the ones that are still alive just don't fucking quit. They keep on looking for a way. They keep on finding that tiny place where they have influence. And that takes effort. That takes work. It's not fair. It's just not fair. It sucks. Like, that shouldn't be the way it is. But there are some people whose life circumstances are such that shit is just harder for them.
Mm-hmm.
And in this moment, no one's coming to save them. So what do they have? Like I said, the ones that are still alive are just going for it. And I wish it weren't that way. Like, I wish it weren't that way, but that's how I see it right now. So it's kind of like a sad answer, because there should be more resources and there shouldn't be this wealth gap, and we shouldn't be criminalizing drug use, and we shouldn't be incarcerating people at the rate that we're incarcerating them, and healthcare should be a right. All of these things are so fucking true, and some people are impacted by the fact that things are that way more than the rest of us. Yeah. And all I can say is, like, yeah, people who are still alive they're just expending more effort than most of us. And it's fucked up, but that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm. I think this, brings it back to, we only have what we've got, and our only thing to do is figure out what our next best steps are. And sometimes before we do that, like you said, all we have is that small influence of the moment that we're in. And what can we do in that moment to ground down, to bring ourselves a little more regulation and safety, to then be able to move forward.
Yeah.
Slightly more capable than the last moment.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is the best place to start. Sometimes it's the only place to start.
I'm thinking about like single moms with 2 young kids with no support. I'm thinking about the person who has relapsed and overdosed so many times but is still somehow alive. Those people are just expending way more energy than someone who's in my current position, right? It's just like,
yeah.
Sometimes all you can do is walk outside and take one breath before you have to go back inside and pick up one of your screaming children. Like that, and that's just your reality. Sometimes all you can do is just like go to treatment one more time, and that's the reality.
Yeah.
And like, we as a culture, I think, have a responsibility to move into the direction that these people are more resourced. And I think that's all of this is connected. It seems so separate. It seems like, well, if we're advocating for people putting the focus on themselves, how is that going to help the people who are the most under-resourced? But I think the reality is that when we do that, our capacity actually does get larger, and we do create those ripples. We do have those compounding waves of change that get bigger and stronger over time. Because right now, so much energy and resources is being wasted. But if we could focus more, I think we can, have that actually make more of a real difference.
Yeah. I mean, that reminds me of, like, right, if it doesn't help, I go to this thought I've had, and we've probably talked about it, Felicia, but I go to this place of, I think it was in our money episode even that we brought this up, like, me being poor doesn't help other people not be poor. Me being, stuck, depressed, mentally ill, like whatever my experiences have been in my life that I've struggled through, that I've, at least in this moment, feel I'm on the other side of in some ways. We're never really arrived. But me in those places doesn't make other people mentally well, doesn't make other people more resourced. It doesn't help the world in any way. So, right, this idea that me focusing on my health and well-being and rest and creating the life I want, or feels most ideal or whatever, I will, like, it just comes back to what we keep saying, right? Like, I have more capacity now
Yeah.
to give in ways that are from my excess, whether it's
Ab-
energy or money or time or all of the above. It doesn't help the world for me. Like, right, like you're saying, like, us focusing on ourselves actually does do the community work of healing the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, that generosity is a natural outcome of that.
Mhm.
Many years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I had this kind of like radical shift in my belief system. And I remember one of the things that came out of that was realizing that, like, it kind of that there was no there's no moral compass. Things are what they are. They're neutral, and we assign meaning to them. And so nothing is inherently more valuable or less valuable than anything else. Like literally anything material, spiritual, there's nothing better or worse. Nothing special, basically. And so if that is true, then there are two kind of there's a fork in the road naturally. Because if nothing really matters, there's no inherent value, then hedonism makes perfect sense. Just go
Mhm.
through life, get yours, have fun. Nothing matters anyway. No big deal. Or everything is sacred.
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
everything matters so much. This is incredibly precious. Everything is highly valuable. I don't have a judgment on like which of those paths is correct because I think they're two sides of the same coin. Like they both make perfect sense as responses to this reality. So then the question becomes, what do I want my life to feel like? Do I want it to be a life that I walk through where I'm relating to everything around me as if this is sacred, as if this is meaningful, as if we are connected, it does matter? And that is how I feel about it. And so if I'm walking through this world with that perspective, then of course there is a natural generosity that arises out of this unburdened, unbricked heart and body.
Hmm.
And taking care of the world around me, whether that's like my fellow people, the environment, like my community, trying to affect large change, of course that is an outcome. So
Mhm.
I really see at the base of this whole like we're creating this reality, we're assigning meaning. For me, it's like me coming into contact with myself, and doing that in a really radical way, taking radical responsibility for my own experience leads to being a better quote unquote member of society.
Mhm.
These two things aren't separate. It all sends me in the same direction, essentially.
Yeah.
I love it.
I think that's such a beautiful perspective to I think there's so much more we can talk about, especially specifically
Mhm.
addressing stress and the overwhelm that comes through all of these things that we're talking about. But I think these nuggets of gold is like those of us who have the ability to create these changes in our lives, then have the ability to support others in creating these changes in their lives. And for listeners who might feel overwhelmed by this prospect of becoming unoverwhelmed, I think take Felicia's beautiful wisdom in starting as small as you need to, starting exactly
Mhm.
where you're at, finding people who can meet you where you're at as you start deconditioning from codependency and enmeshment, so that you can move forward and call in whatever beautiful possibilities would be radical for yourself in your
Mhm.
life.
And always maybe get support if, like you
We
were
always say
saying,
it.
always get support if you feel like, if you can, and if you
Yeah.
feel like you need.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, there's obviously, as we talked about, there's such barriers to access to mental health
Mhm.
care. And I think we're trending in the right direction. So if you have the privilege of insurance and finding a therapist who's within insurance with you, like hopefully that offers more possibility for support in moving through these things. I think stress and burnout and overwhelm are so real, and medical support might be necessary. If you've got a primary care
Mhm.
practitioner that can support you, tools for myself. I love like herbs, working with an herbalist. I think there's so many ways we can, I think we'll have to have a follow-up episode on all of these things.
As usual.
We didn't, I mean, you brought in the somatics a little bit, but like so much of this is a somatic experience that will continue.
Definitely.
But we're so grateful for you, Felicia.
Yeah. And where, Felicia, just in ending, where can people reach you? What reminder of what you do, what you're offering maybe now?
Sure. So for folks who are wanting support in their businesses, I'm on the internet as The Bad Therapist. My website is thebadtherapist.coach. And I do business coaching for therapists in private practice as well as other types of practitioners. So like coaches often work with me too. And in my therapy practice, that is something that you'll have to check in with me about to see like if I'm currently taking on clients. So yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. Can I add one thing actually?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So I would love to just like give a piece of encouragement or advice for people who are listening. If you are a person who is overwhelmed right now, who's stressed, burnt out, focus on you. It's okay. Take the pressure off yourself to be like everyone's go-to person, to get it right, to be perfect. Just, it's okay. You're allowed to be selfish right now. Like, this is your time to do that. If you're somebody who is resourced and has extra, fantastic. Please go out and help other people. So regardless of what position you're in, if I'm not here to tell you that everyone needs to be out there helping all the time. If you've been overwhelmed for a long time, it's okay for you to take time to take care of yourself and take as long as you need. And when you feel ready, you can come back and you can extend yourself again. But like, it's okay if you need a period of time in your life where you're just focused on you.
I think that's such a beautiful invitation.
Ending.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Felicia. Thanks for being on Being in Practice.
Thank you.
All right. Goodbye.